Thank you so much. We are very excited to introduce the second portion of the youth programming for today. This will be the Alaska Youth for Environmental Action. The Alaska Youth for Environmental Action is actually a program that I have been privileged to be a part of when I was a teenager. From the age of about 14 to 18, I was a part of this program and represented the Activism chapter. The Alaska Youth for Environmental Action, otherwise known as AYEA, is a program of the Alaska Center Education Fund, and they seek to inspire and train rural and urban youth leaders to impact environmental issues by providing leadership skills training and supporting youth-led community action projects and campaigns. They're committed to a youth-led model, and they train youth to train youth, which is something that is really cool to see in person if you ever have the opportunity to attend and watch one of their organizing summits. The teens choose the issues that AYEA works on, and teens are the leaders in all the AYEA campaigns and projects. Adult mentors and staff of the program provide essential support to help the teens learn the skills that they need to successfully reach their project goals. The vision is to create a statewide movement of diverse young Alaskans who have the skills, the connections, and the inspiration to effectively advocate for our communities and our environment here in Alaska. We are really excited to have the new program coordinator, Ann Hillman, be the facilitator for today's panel. And we have Alexis Rexford from Anchorage and Uklavik. We have Ella Mayo Kiley from Anchorage. We have Emily Taylor from Anchorage and Bristol Bay. And we have Zoe, who's from Nome, and Zoe Oklesic from Nome. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll pass the mic on over to you. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you very much for that introduction. As she said, I'm Ann Hillman. I'm the pretty much brand new program coordinator for AYEA, which means I have the extreme pleasure and privilege to learn about AYEA really from the other folks who are part of this panel. I'm calling in from Dena'ina Lands in Anchorage, and I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves as well and say where you're from, please. So, Alex.
Hello everyone, I am Alex Rexford, and I'm actually from Gamble. I was born and raised here in Anchorage though, and I do have family in Utqiagvik. And most recently I was the AF Fellow for Utqiagvik, which gave me the really unique opportunity to go up to Utqiagvik and learn about the community, learn about like my culture and roots there, and also to bring a lot of these conversations as well. So yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm really grateful to be here. I'll pass it on to Em.
Hi, my name is Em. I'm calling in today from Dena'ina Lands, and I've been a youth organizer with AYEA for about a year now. And I also worked very closely with Alex this summer. I was the Anchorage AYEA Summer Fellow, and I'm also an Indigenous commercial fisherman, and my family is from Bristol Bay. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here, and AYEA is a really important program for me. And so, yeah, I'm going to pass it to Ella.
I'm Ella. I'm calling in from Dena'ina Lands as well, and like I have been a youth organizer with AYEA for about a year now. I'll pass it to Zoe.
Uvanga Ataga Manik Sitnua Sakmut Gurunga, Akaga Denise Oliver, Apaga Franklin Oklesic Jr., Atataga Franklin Oklesic Sr., Aussie Kurt Oliver, Anaga Carol Oliver, Aussie Lavano Oklesic. Hi, my name is Zoe Oklesic. My Inupiaq name is Manik. I'm calling from the land, the Sitnuasak land, which is on the Inupiaq land. So yeah, I've been with AYEA for about almost a year now, and yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Well, thank you all for that. I think the best people to really explain AYEA are obviously the youth in it. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about what AYEA is and how does it work?
So AYEA is a youth-led and youth-driven program. It's a really important part of our model that everything comes from the youth, and AYEA has chapters all around the state in places like Anchorage or Dutch Harbor, but there's also youth in AYEA all around the state, and a big part of AYEA, alongside of the work that we do all year long, especially with the campaigns that AYEA does each year, every 2 years. There's a campaign. This past year, our campaign was focused on climate justice. And there's also a big part of AYEA is gathering of youth together at summits, 2 summits each year.
And what kinds of things happen at summits?
So summits, I had the privilege to go to the Youth Organizer Summit last fall, which was really helped kind of jumpstart my involvement with AYEA. And it's kind of a gathering of youth from all around the state. So I got to meet other youth from everywhere, and you get led in trainings and work together to plan the campaign for the year at the Youth Organizer Summit. And I think it's really valuable that, as well as adult trainers, there are also youth trainers who have been to summits before. So you get to learn from your peers. And another summit that AYEA does every year is the Civics and Conservation Summit, which brings youth to Juneau, the state capital, and youth get to talk to their legislators and listen in on sessions and hearings and important things. Yeah, so I think the summits are a really big part of AYEA, and it's really valuable to be able to come together with other like-minded people and learn from each other.
Thanks. So Em just talked about like there's chapters and groups of kids, young people all around the state. But Zoe, you're up in Nome organizing all by yourself to a degree. First, I'd love it if you could tell folks just a little bit about Nome, because there are listeners who are not in Alaska, and then talk a little bit about what that's like to be up in a rural part and doing this work with your own initiative.
So Nome, it has a population of about 3,500 people, and it's only accessed by plane. We have good connection, or we don't really have good Wi-Fi or anything, so you're really alone up here, which can be really hard on your mental health. And I've done a lot of work on my own because Nome, it's really divided. There's people who really believe in climate change, and then there's people, which is a lot of Nome, who don't believe in climate change, which gets really hard, especially if you're doing this work by yourself. Yeah, so like I did a climate strike here in Nome it was about a year ago now, and there was this Facebook post which was really hard, and there was a lot of adults on it saying like, oh, you kids shouldn't be doing this, climate change isn't real. And it's really hard because you know these people and you know their families, because we're such a small, isolated community. So yeah.
That sounds really challenging. Yeah. Alex, I wonder if you would be able to build on that at all. You've always been really passionate about these issues. Tell us how you got involved in working for climate justice, and then maybe a little bit about your work up in Utqiagvik this summer.
Yeah, so I'd say that I've become really interested in it, not because necessarily like I want to, but out of like the necessity to. My maternal grandfather, he contributed to climate work himself through just his knowledge of like weather and sea ice and like animal behaviors. But my work up in Utqiagvik this summer, you know, I wasn't born and raised in Utqiagvik. I've only ever been there for short-term visits. And really the extractive economy of the oil industry is so heavily present up there. And I faced a lot of the same kind of pushback from community members that Zoe has. And the way that I've kind of approached it is really building trust and communication between people that I've come across, and then having these conversations in a good way.
Having these conversations in a good way. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what does that look like?
I'd say really intentional, really open and honest, finding a common ground, and really having respect for one another.
Would any of the rest of you like to build on that? Ella, I know you've been really involved with having conversations around climate, specifically in really public ways, like with a climate strike. And that's kind of how you got involved with AYEA. Can you tell us like what a climate strike is like and how that contributes to conversations?
Yeah, so I first got involved with AYEA right before the Anchorage strike that took place in September of last year, which for me was the biggest rally or strike that I had ever been to. I'd been to smaller strikes and rallies relating to a few different things, climate change and other things, but it was definitely the biggest that I'd ever been to, and there was a sense of community with that one as well, because it took place on the same day that several other strikes around the country and around the world and around the state all took place on the same day. And so having those conversations with people at the strike, that I knew people were having the same conversations at the same time all around the world, and I felt a big power in that. And it was the first time that I really felt confident and powerful talking about these things, because climate justice and climate action was never something that was one of my biggest passions until I became involved in AYEA. I was much more passionate about human rights and civil rights issues, but through working with other AYEA youth and hearing people's stories, it really became something that I am now incredibly passionate about, and that was the first time since having those conversations and having that kind of shift in opinion that I was having these conversations with people. And so it was really exciting to be in an environment with lots of like-minded people and having conversations with people of all ages and from all over, and really feeling like I was making a difference in a way that I hadn't before.
You've also similarly been involved with climate strikes here in Anchorage. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So that strike that Ella was talking about was September 20th of last year, and the next climate strike, and it ended up being the last in-person strike that we have done in recent, was Black Friday of 2019, and I really helped shape the message of that particular strike, and we kind of focused on it was just Thanksgiving, and that has a lot of problematic history related to it. So we really tried to focus on that problematic history as well as Indigenous sovereignty, because Indigenous care and knowledge of the land is helps the climate so much, and Indigenous people protecting their lands can help fight climate change. And it was also Black Friday, so we tried to focus on anti-consumerism, because a lot of our consumerist habits can have really detrimental effects on the environment. So that strike and the September 20th strike I was involved in, but that second one I really helped shape the vision of. And we actually ended up marching around the mall because we were right near the mall and it was Black Friday. So that was a cool experience. And yeah, it's just a really powerful environment, and you get to be surrounded by people who share similar feelings to you, and you get to talk about all new things. And I think it's really a good attention grabber as well to raise awareness, because you're in a big numbers and lots of people can see you.
How did people at the mall react to y'all?
Well, we were explicitly reached out to beforehand because they thought that we were gonna storm the mall, which was kind of funny because they were really worried that we were but obviously we didn't go inside. But yeah, I think we got a lot of people's attention. There was a big string of us where by the time that the people in the front had gotten around, the people in the back were still in view. So we kind of surrounded them a little bit. But yeah, I think we got a lot of people's attention, and it was really, I just think it was a really powerful experience.
You were just talking about large numbers and how that got people's attention. And Zoe, when you were in Nome, your climate strike wasn't large numbers, but still got people's attention. I was wondering if you could tell us a few more details about that, because it sounds like a really powerful and kind of life-changing experience.
Yeah, so we started our strike from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and we started off with 3 students. It was me and 2 of my friends. And so we were just happy to have other people there because me and my friend had planned that climate strike. And so just having one other person seemed like a success already. And then slowly more students kept trickling in, and around, I think, 11 a.m. we had 9 students, which was a huge success to us in our eyes, because even though it was a small amount, we had tripled in size. And I think it was pretty hilarious too, because that entire week, because we did it on a Friday, it was so sunny and super nice. And on that Friday, it was stormy. But yeah, anyways, so that strike, though, we had a lot of people, there was a few people who had flipped us off. There was people shaking their heads oh no, you shouldn't be doing this. But what we got in that hate, we also had community members support us by bringing us hot chocolate and some donuts. So yeah, it's really interesting being from here because, yeah, like I said earlier, it's really divided on who believes in climate change and who doesn't, which is really interesting to me.
Can you talk a little bit about more, why is there that divide? Why do people have a hard time believing it's real? I mean, I know in a lot of places in rural Alaska, there's very obvious physical evidence.
That's something I'm unsure of. It's really hilarious. I have this teacher, and me and him were talking. He's like, climate change isn't real. If it was real, you'd see hotter summers, more wildfires, the ice caps would be melting. And I was just like, but that's happening right in front of your eyes, sir. So it's really, I'm not sure, because we do see the effects here. Our sea ice is staying for a less and less amount of time each year. Our winters are been really harsh lately, and our summers, in May, it was 70 degrees, which has never happened before. It was really insane. So I wish I knew why people didn't believe in it, but I really don't know.
I could add on to that. So for the Arctic Slope region, which Utqiagvik is a part of, we have, so here in Alaska, we have native corporations, and we have regional, and then we have village corporations. And regional, they have everything that's subsurface, so they have subsurface rights, which means that they have rights to oil. And ASRC, the corporation that I'm a shareholder of, they're really oil rich, and I'd say that's where the divide up on the Arctic Slope comes from, because there's a lot of families that are profiting, and just as a people, we have grown so dependent on oil revenues.
And I think that kind of applies not only in rural communities, but also with a lot of Alaskans statewide, just because our economy has become so dependent on oil revenue that when you point out that we don't have much time to get off of our reliance of fossil fuels and that we need to move towards renewable energy, a lot of people kind of just immediately are like, well, the economy. So yeah, I would say like oil kind of has a hold on a lot of Alaskans especially in regards to profit. So that kind of changes people's attitudes, especially because it can be hard for some people to see those long-term effects of climate change versus the short-term payoff of oil extraction and money.
So if you know that you're going to face so much opposition, and I don't think it's just young people and others in Alaska who are facing this, like this is a common conversation, oh, climate change isn't real, or we need oil, or we need an economy to survive, because that's what we've, that's what our society is built. So people need money to survive. So how do you all respond to those arguments, and how do you get people to listen to you and your own expertise? Big question for all of you.
So a lot of the backlash that I get is online, which is hard because they're hiding behind a screen. But like a way I kind of deal with the backlash is I type out what I want to say, and like it's usually a pretty angry response, and then I just delete it, because what they're saying usually is just like, oh, you're young, you don't know what you're talking about. And so like I want to reply in a equally as mean way, but I know that's not going to help any conversation. So a way I kind of do, or I just speak out anyways, because I know that my children and my children's children need to live on this land, and that's important to me, and I want them to be able to go crabbing, and I want them to be able to go caribou hunting and moose hunting. So I just speak out because I think about the next generations to come.
I could build off of that, and I definitely relate to that. We, as Indigenous youth and as Indigenous cultures and peoples, we all have this deep understanding of the land and how to take care of the land, and we want to preserve it for our future generations. And the concept of a regenerative economy is not new. And I was talking to one of my supervisors the other day, and she said that like a lot of the people working in these corporations, they're our family members, and she explained it to me that they've lost their instructions. We all have instructions to, like, in this movement, and how to take care of the land, and it's just a matter of reaching them in a good way so they could find those instructions.
And I think I also get a lot of the backlash that I receive is online, so I kind of just ignore those. But I think one thing that people seem to forget or not realize about these movements is that we want to create, newer, greener ways of energy and ways of living, but we also want to create green jobs too. And so I always say, like, it's not my goal for every single person who works in the oil industry to become unemployed. I think that in order for there to be a transition of energy, there also needs to be a transition of jobs. And those people need to be given the resources to be able to, say, work in a greener energy industry. And, there are people who work for oil companies that's the way that they survive. But I think that there needs to be change created to be able to transition our economy to green energy. And so I think that's another thing that I like to point out is that, putting people out of jobs is not our goal, but we do need to transition our energy and help the environment.
Yeah, I just want to uplift everything that you're saying, Em. And, you know, like the oil industry is declining. Like there's less of a need for oil, and we've seen that through this pandemic. So from what I've learned is that oil has been like in the negatives, and that's a first for these corporations. And what we're really trying to do is build up people power and structures to move towards a regenerative economy.
Right. I think a lot of times there's this idea that, you know, when people are talking about the environment and not wanting to invest in oil, that like we don't care about the economy. But I think a lot of people really do. And we want to invest in renewable energy so that, like Alex said and like Em said, our economy lasts. And so that we're not just thinking about right now and who has jobs right now and whose jobs are reliant on oil, but who will be able to have jobs 50 years from now when there's such little reliance on oil and so many other people are no longer using oil. We want to invest in things that will still be applicable years down the line so that we're not just thinking about the economy now, but the economy 50, 30, 100 years, however far down the line.
So when you're talking to people about these issues, like the four of you have just explained this beautifully in this space, what advice would you give to other youth who are also trying to explain this? And maybe they're not just reaching opposition online, which is where most things are happening these days, but like if you're interacting with a family member or you're interacting with someone who sees you with a sign on the street, would you have advice on like how to encounter that conversation, but also to do it in a way that keeps you healthy and safe? It's a big question.
My advice would be, my dad has always told me that you'll solve nothing with anger. You should go into it with an open mind and come out with an open mind. And you may change your ideas on a few things, which is okay. That's how you grow. So my biggest advice is to go into it open-minded and with no anger. Like anger solves nothing.
Yeah, and building off of that is often, if you present with anger, you can be painted in a bad way, even though you might be receiving that energy from the other person. But also, Anne, you had mentioned, staying safe. And I think there is a point where you don't have to engage with people, like you mentioned people seeing you with a sign on the street. If someone sees me with a sign on the street and wants to start yelling at me or throwing hateful words my way, I don't have to engage or participate in a conversation with that person because that could put me in an unsafe situation. And same with online, you don't have to respond to every comment. You don't have to read every comment. And yeah, I think while these conversations are important and it's important to talk to people, there is a point where you have to put your own safety first.
I totally agree with everything that you said. And my advice is come at it with, like Zoe said, from a place of love and like an open mind. And then also building off of what Em said is it's really hard when you're talking to like your family members about these issues and they're opposite of you. They don't want to have these conversations. So just know when to stop and know your boundaries.
Yeah, I agree with so much with what everyone has said. And I think it's also really important with your own mental health to think about after you have these conversations and have a support system, friends, family, mentors, whoever it is, that you can go and talk about it afterwards. And even if it's just like, you know, talking for 5 minutes about how it frustrated you or something, having a way to get it off your chest, or have a conversation with someone, say like, this was really difficult for me, can I talk to you about it? Having people that you can lean on when you have these difficult conversations, because they can be really mentally taxing, and it's really hard if you don't have someone to talk to about it after having a difficult conversation with a friend or a family member, someone you really care about.
I totally agree with that as well. And, you know, you have to find your community, and there are people out there that want to talk about these issues. And I think that's what's so great about AYEA. I've personally never been involved in AYEA chapter or like the summit-wise, but I was able to partake in it through like the summer fellowship. And the relationships that I've built with a lot of our mentors were really impactful and really inspiring.
I wonder if some of you who have been part of an AYEA chapter can talk kind of about those relationships and how they've helped you keep the momentum going, especially when, like, as you all have mentioned, it's hard. Like, it's mentally hard, and it's just, it's hoping to help a community change can take a lot out of you. So yeah, how have those relationships supported you? What have you learned from each other?
I think through AYEA chapters and summits, I've met, you know, some of my best friends, and I think it's really valuable to have those people who, you know, you can talk about like difficult or prevalent issues with, and who, you know, can share similar views and frustrations with you. Yeah, and I think that the relationships that you you can develop from organizing and advocating can be really meaningful. Yeah, I've met, AYEA has brought me a lot of my really, really good friends.
I agree 100% with what Em had said. Coming from such a isolated and small community, it made me feel like I'm more connected with my state now. And it's really nice to be able to talk to people with the same views on social issues and just issues in general. So yeah, I agree 100% with you, Em.
So we've kind of touched into things that are important to keep you going. So a strong support network, an ability to take care of yourself, and just thinking about entering conversations without anger. And we talked a little bit about climate strikes, which is something very concrete that you all did. I wonder if you have other examples of ways that you, through AYEA or through other means, have really expressed and tried to push for change and used your voice to do that.
One of the ways that actually kind of led me to AYEA is the Pebble Mine, which is, if you don't know, so Bristol Bay is in Western Alaska, and Bristol Bay has the largest wild salmon run on planet Earth. And there is a big proposed copper and gold pit mine to be put right at the headwaters of Bristol Bay. And it would be really detrimental to the environment surrounding it and the fishing industry there, which is really important to me and my family. And Bristol Bay is just, it's my home, and it's holds a lot of my culture. So originally I kind of started advocating for myself and my community through that when I actually testified to the Army Corps of Engineers for the draft environmental impact statement. And that, you know, I testified and I spoke at a rally, and that kind of jump-started what my desire to advocate for myself and my community. And I wanted to find other ways to do that. And I was also passionate about issues like climate change. So that kind of led me to AYEA. And I think we all have different ways of being brought into this movement. And I think Alex touched on this earlier as well, is that I say that I was brought into the movement by necessity because there's a big threat looming over my home, and I had to speak out against that. And I'm glad that I'm able to do that, but I would say that it was kind of a necessity for me to start advocating for my community.
Zoe, you were part of putting forth a resolution in front of the Alaska Federation of Natives. I was wondering if you could tell us about that and about the resolution, what that whole process was like.
Yeah, so last October, I was in this resolution making class at Elders and Youth Conference, which is a conference that happens every year. And that's where I met the other co-authors, Nana Esh and Kwana. And then, and my friend Allison was with me. And so I had talked about wanting to start a plastic bag ban in Nome specifically, and then hopefully in the state of Alaska, which is what AYEA is working on. And so after hearing that, Nana Esh and Kwana had came up to me and they told me this idea. They said, hey, we want to start this resolution. And it was a resolution to help make climate change a state of emergency within the Alaska Federation for Natives. And so it was kind of hard working on it because we were staying in two different hotels. So Nana Esh and Kwana wrote a lot of it, and me and Allison had helped and added a few things here and there. And then I remember the next day they presented it to the Elders and Youth Conference, and it voted and it passed. And then me and Allison had to unfortunately go back here to Nome. And so Nana Esh and Kwana had defended and debated it at the AFN convention for over an hour, which is crazy to me. And then it got passed there. So, yeah.
So tell us a little, like, what is a resolution at AFN? What does that mean? Why is that important?
It's important because it helps to bring Alaska Native tribes together to work on an issue. And so they were going to start a little committee to help with the making climate change a state of emergency. But unfortunately, COVID hit, and a lot of my work has been pushed back a lot. So we're not really sure what's happening now. We've been emailing with people, but it's been pushed back quite a bit.
But as young people, you were able to create something that really has the force to help a really influential body make serious change in the state and in the nation. What's that like? What's it feel like to know that you can have that much influence?
It's really crazy to me because I was always scared to speak up. I was scared that I was going to get a lot of backlash, and I was scared I was going to, have people judge me, which is bound to happen anyways, but that's what really scared me. And so last year when that resolution passed, I realized I have a powerful voice. I can do anything I put my mind to. So it really empowered me, and it really helped me with my work. It really made me more confident in myself. So it's just unbelievable that I still can't believe that it passed, and it's been almost a year.
I watched the video of you guys testifying to the panel, and I get chills just thinking about it, and what you're saying is it's really empowering, and I love to see it.
Have the rest of you learned about or spoken before governing bodies like that? And if so, what was that like?
I mentioned my testimony to the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a part of the EIS process. I was pretty intimidated. It was kind of my first kind of experience like that. But I felt a lot of support after I did. But one thing that I kind of remember is a lot of those people have to stay really serious. So I thought it was really interesting. I actually got really emotional during my testimony and started just like bawling. And I was like looking at this guy from the Army Corps of Engineers, and he was just like stone-faced while I was like breaking down, which I don't know. I just always remember that. But I think it's a really powerful experience, really uplifting experience. And I think especially in issues like that, you know, like AFN or like Pebble, you just have such community support around you. And yeah, like I feel you're never alone in those kinds of things. Even though it might be scary, like you always have people there for you. And yeah, I think it's just a really empowering experience.
Have you all used other strategies like writing letters to the editor or op-eds or anything like that to express your thoughts on different laws or issues?
Yeah, I've done it in more of like a quiet way. In one of my classes at Alaska Pacific University, I wrote an op-ed as my final for really like the need to recognize traditional ecological knowledge as a form of science, because it is a very science-driven university, I'd say. And yeah, it sat really well with my professor, it felt good.
Ella, I know you've done some online organizing as well. What's that like?
So I, along with we were heavily involved with the organizing of the virtual climate strike organized by AYEA, which took place on Earth Day of this year. The planning of that strike actually started in January of this year, and it was meant to be an in-person protest of the lease sale of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And so originally we were planning on having an in-person strike, and it was completely different focus. But as we were planning and as the COVID pandemic was evolving and the lockdown was evolving, it became apparent that we would not be able to hold an in-person strike. It just wouldn't be possible. So there was a period of time where like everything was up in the air. We didn't know how we could hold a strike, if we could hold it online, if we could even hold it at all, when it would happen. But eventually we decided on having sort of webinar-like strike thing that it was weird for everyone. None of us had ever really done anything like it before. We didn't really know how it would work out. But since everything was in lockdown, we were doing it all the planning online, which provided the opportunity to include other AYEA youth from around the state, which is something that I hadn't experienced before, planning a strike with not just the AYEA chapter, but all these other youth from Homer and Juneau and Seward and Sitka and Fairbanks, and, you know, working with these youth from all across the state to plan a strike, and that we were all working on it together, which was a really cool experience. And I ended up having the opportunity to MC the strike with Darby, who is from Sitka, and we ended up having speakers from all over Alaska as well, youth speakers. We had some legislators speaking. It was a really cool experience. It didn't have the effect and the impact that other strikes have had in the past when you're in person and taking up physical space. There were a lot of technical issues along the way. We had issues with audio and video and all kinds of things. It was definitely a really bumpy road, and it definitely was not what we imagined happening when we first started planning the strike. But I think it was a really incredible experience and really formative experience for a lot of people who were involved with the strike, of working with people from across the state to plan a strike and kind of trying things out that you might not otherwise be able to do with a strike because you're able to do things online. So we had other activities that you might not usually be able to have. We were able to have speakers from all across Alaska since it was online. It was just a really different experience, and something that it certainly wasn't what we imagined and what we planned, but it ended up turning out really well and being a really great experience for a lot of people.
And I would say that especially over the past 6 or so months since COVID hit, I would say Zoom webinar types of things have been something that a lot of Alaskan organizers have become pretty familiar with. I also was part of the planning for that Earth Day strike, but have done a lot of webinars for information or organizing purposes. The Earth Day strike was kind of my first experience with that, but I also got really involved with the Just Transition webinar series, which was kind of an educational webinar series about the Just Transition framework. And I also got to participate and be a speaker in a webinar for Wild Salmon Day, which we kind of focused on the fight against pebbles. So it was kind of in the form of a rally as well, but a webinar on Zoom. So I'd say that format of online organizing has been something that a lot of us have become pretty familiar with over the past few months.
Interesting to see how much longer this will be the way that we organize. One of the things you just mentioned, Em, was that you were involved with educational webinars and things that were really aimed at helping people understand issues better. Is education, is that part of the movement? Is that part of what it means to create change?
I'd say education is probably one of the most important parts of the movement, because if you don't educate people on the issues that you're talking about, and you don't get them to understand where you're coming from and what your goal is, then your movement can't grow. So I would say that that's one of the most important aspects, because some people might not know about climate change, and so, or other issues like the issue of pebble. A lot of people aren't educated on the real adverse effects of that and why it's harmful and why it shouldn't happen. And so I think education is extremely important in bringing people in, because they just might not know. And if you can't educate people on the issues that you're speaking about, and you can't bring them into your movement, then it's hard to create a lot of change.
So I see you nodding a lot. I was wondering if you may just be affirming, but I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that from your perspective, both educating others but also educating yourself about issues.
I just kind of nod when I hear people talking, but I think something that's interesting is I've had to educate myself on a lot of topics. I didn't really know what climate change was. I didn't really understand it until about 2016, when our sea ice went out in March, and a lot of people lost their crab pots, which is how they feed their families and make money. So I was like, Dad, why did the sea ice go out? And he told me, he's like, oh, the earth is changing and all this. And that's when I think I really started getting into this work, is when that happened. So I started educating myself on it, and I started talking with people. And so, so I think it's interesting that I like these, the educational webinars. I think that would have really helped me when I was a little bit younger. But I think,
And I think education has also been an integral part of AYEA's model as well. A big part of the summit is trainings. That's kind of the whole point, is training and learning how to advocate for yourself, but also learning new topics. There's a training that is done at a lot of AYEA summits, the decolonization training. So you kind of learn more about indigenous issues and how racial justice and climate justice are related. And there's also always a training on the Just Transition framework, which I mentioned. yeah, so even within AYEA, that's a big part of it is, yeah, learning about issues, learning how to advocate for yourself, and yeah.
And also I think sharing stories of like hearing other people's stories and sharing your own stories of experiences you have or other people have of being personally impacted with climate change is something that's a large part of AYEA as well. I think like at Climate Strikes, we always have a lot of like youth speakers sharing their stories. You have other webinars and other activities and programs and the summits that are a lot of the focus for a large part of them are, you know, learning how to share your own stories and share your perspectives. And I think that's something that is in some ways unique about the climate movement is that a lot of issues that are in our world right now, a lot of it is about like morality and ethics and your own personal worldview. But I think something that is unique about the climate issue is that it's not really about that. It's about the science, and it's like it's not a partisan issue. It's everyone across the board is affected by it, and it doesn't matter like what your religious beliefs are, what your political beliefs are, where you come from. It affects everyone, and I think if you come at it from the point of view of educating people and explaining like this is what the issue is, this is why it's going to affect you, I think that's a way that you really can make a lot of change, because a lot of people who don't believe in climate change or don't support climate action or all these other things, it comes from a place of they just don't understand the issue or they don't understand the effects that climate change will have on the environment and on people and on the economy and all these other things, that it's just a lack of understanding. And so if you come at it from the point of view of educating people, then you're a lot more likely to actually change their opinions and educate them, and their views will change.
One thing I think about too, I kind of mentioned this with Pebble, but I feel like this applies to a lot of issues related to climate and the environment. My sister was telling me about this classmate in high school who was always super, super pro-Pebble, like outspokenly to her, especially because, you know, we're from Bristol Bay, so we're very obviously anti-Pebble, but he was always very, very pro-Pebble, always talked about it. And he actually reached out to her when they were in college because he had to write a paper about it, I think. And once he actually started researching, he was like, oh, this is not something that should happen. And kind of reached out and was like, you were right all along. I don't agree with the project anymore. And I feel like that happens a lot is people might just hear things from the people around them that might not be true. And so once they become educated on issues, they realize and their viewpoints may change.
And one thing I feel like you've all sort of alluded to at this point is that when you're talking about environmental issues, you're not just talking about the environment. Like you are talking about science and the planet changing, but you're also talking about the people who are affected by these issues. And really, climate justice issues intersect with so many other justice issues. And I was wondering, Alex, if you could delve into that a bit and how all of these topics do intersect.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the organizers up here in Alaska that has really made an impact on me, I'm going to quote her. Her name's Lynette. She said that racism has always been like environmental racism. And it's so true because there's a siren. Those on the front lines of the community are facing so many other social issues. And sorry, I'm really distracted, but yeah, they're so interconnected, and like we can't have Indigenous liberation without Black liberation, and we're all so focused on one goal, and there's so many different aspects to that, and there's so much of this work being done, but we're all in this together, and I think that's what's really important to remember.
And I think if you think about how people of color are so disproportionately affected by by climate change, you know, a lot of indigenous communities in Alaska on like coastline communities are having to be relocated because their coastlines are eroding because of climate change. You know, like the island of Shishmaref, sea ice protects Shishmaref from storms in the winter, but when the sea ice melts earlier or is not as apparent, those storms hit the coastline of Shishmaref harder and it erodes. So that community is being set up for, that community is primarily an indigenous community and is being, is having to be relocated, which is a really expensive project, and that burden is largely being put on that community. Or how a lot of POC communities are often in places with higher levels of pollution, which can lead to other harmful, you know, effects on their bodies. And yeah, so I think issues of racism and environmental issues are really interconnected, and people of color really feel those are really affected by these issues a lot.
I've noticed that also really affected people in poverty. Like I mentioned, my people really depend on the sea ice for crab, which is just one main food source. And if we don't have that sea ice, if people can't trust the sea ice because it's not as thick as it usually is, we can't buy food. A gallon of milk is $6. So we really depend on the land to feed our families and to help us ourselves just to survive. So yeah.
Yeah, and like Zoe touched on, that subsistence is really the foundation of a lot of Alaska Native people's lifestyles, and a lot of us rely on fishing and hunting to survive and as a food source. And if that's taken away, it's a lot harder to survive. And if you can't use the sea ice to hunt or fish, yeah, buying food at the grocery store is super expensive, and it's also a really big part of our culture too, is hunting and subsistence. So yeah.
I'm going to build on what both of you guys were talking about. The rural communities that are being forced to relocate, it's not only expensive in terms of money, but, you know, we have sacred ties to the land, and for us it's spiritual, and our well-being is tied to our ways of life. And hang on, waiting for the siren to go by. Anyways, yeah, it's really important for us to really uplift Indigenous voices, because we're on the front lines of all of these issues, particularly like climate issues, and therefore we're closest to the solutions.
Building off with what Alex said, our people have been on this land for thousands of years. We know this land, and we know in our souls that when something's off with the earth, and it's really important to us. And like Alex said, we really know the land, and yeah.
And I think with Indigenous voices and people of color and minorities being included in the climate movement, there's also a large issue within the environmental movement and sustainability movement and all these other movements that are connected, that are so alienating to people of color, minorities, people who aren't as privileged, in things like the sustainability of, you know, the zero waste movement, which is, you know, asking people to buy all these expensive things, and the issues with white veganism of, you know, shaming people for practicing their culture of, you know, all these things that, you know, white people just don't understand of, and kind of shaming other people for not having the same experiences that we do and going about things in a different way. And I think that's a real issue as well that needs to be addressed within the climate movement as well, of not being as alienating to people of color and underprivileged people of you don't need to be a wealthy white person to make a positive impact on the environment and live a more sustainable life. And I think that's kind of a disconnect that kind of needs to be resolved within the climate movement.
Yeah, and especially with the idea of like veganism, you know, like we've been saying is that rural Alaskan grocery stores are so expensive. So hunting really helps it lessen the cost of living and eating, and trying to access food from the grocery store that is vegan only raises that price exponentially. And also hunting and animals is such a part of our culture, and Native people have such a deep respect for the animals, and we use every part of the animal, and it's not just you know, for trophy or you know, we see the animals as our relatives, and the respect for the land and respect for the animals is really important to us. So it's not only you know, there's economic, but also like cultural, and you know, hunting is so different from farm agriculture. You know, the animals are free for their whole life and then they're hunted, and eating wild meat in rural Alaska is so much more sustainable than trying to access vegan products, you know, that have been shipped from the other side of the world. So I think, yeah, there's so much misunderstanding there.
Yeah, completely agree. You know, everything we buy at the grocery store does have a carbon footprint, and it's less. That's why, like, you're encouraged to shop local. But when we're talking about, like, you know, veganism, we do have to consider where the food's coming from, and we do have to consider, you know, the farmers whose labor is being exploited, and it is just another tactic of this racism.
We're going to take it deep and hit on the real issues for our last few minutes of conversation. You all have really highlighted really important things. It's important to realize that hunted meat is healthier meat. It's important to realize our ties to land and culture. It's important to realize so many different ways to look at environmentalism, and like the older concepts of environmentalism as conservation, they don't work. Like they don't work anymore and never have. So with our last few minutes, because we've hit our hour mark, I'd love it if you could each just give one last word of advice to other young people who are really concerned about all of the things that you all have talked about today and all of the issues in the environments around us, both in urban and in rural settings. And we'll leave them with a word of hope and where they can go forward.
My main piece of advice is to just speak out. It's super scary at first and you don't think anybody will listen, but you have to realize that your voice is your most powerful tool, and it can create so much change by just starting that conversation. So speak out when you can, and yeah, your voice is so powerful.
I'd say my piece of advice for other youth who want to advocate for themselves in their community is that it's not your job to save the world. You're not going to solve every issue today or next week or next month or ever. You can't solve everything, and it's the weight of the world is not on your shoulders. And it's yeah, and that's okay. You are capable of as much as you are, and yeah, I think it can get really overwhelming to think about all of these issues that you think that you have to solve right now. But yeah, it's not your responsibility to save everyone and save everything.
Thank you for that. Totally like felt everything that you said, and that's a lot of what I go by as well. But my word of advice would be know why you're doing what you're doing, because we all have a role within this movement, and it's just a matter of finding that role and then finding the community and really take care of yourself. Prioritize your mental health, because when you're not in good relationship with yourself, you can't be in good relationship with other people. So just take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think with that, with taking care of yourself, I think don't be afraid to do something wrong or make a mistake or fail. Like, not everything is going to be perfect, but as long as you put your best foot forward and put in an effort, and as long as you care about what you're doing, it's going to be okay. Like, even if you make a mistake or not as many people come to your strike as you thought you would, or you don't convince someone on your first try, like, that's okay. You're doing your best, and like, that's all you can do. As long as you're trying and as long as you're speaking up, like, that's enough, and you don't need to worry about making a mistake. As long as you learn from it and keep trying, in some cases, that's even better.
Well, I would like to thank all of you and the wisdom that you've brought to the conversation today. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to the Summit for inviting us to have a panel. If anyone is interested in learning more about AYEA, that's AYEA, you can go to the website, ayea.org, ayea.org. And thank you for joining us. Thanks, Maka.
Thank you so much, Emily, Alex, Zoe, Ella, and Anne. I love some of the intersections that you wove. You created such a good example of how food security intersects with environmentalism, as well as human rights and indigenous rights, and especially the rights of youth of Alaska. I think all of you, while you're young by the Western civilization form of age, I think you speak with wisdom that is built up of your entire experience of growing up in Alaska. And I appreciate that, and I feel so proud. I know that's kind of a funny thing to say, as I don't know you all well, but I'm so proud of what you do to represent your communities and your cultures and your state. So thank you again so much. And so your panel concludes the youth programming for today. I have a few seconds of housekeeping and logistics before we turn it over to our administrator to close out today. Again, I'd like to share about the UAF credit. So for anyone that would like to get university credit, the University of Alaska Fairbanks is able to offer that. And you just need to attend 14 hours total of combined hours of the session over the next 3 days. You're able to sign up, and there's information in the UAF credit tab in the website. And if you are younger than 18, you just need a parent's information on like your registration form, and so you can contact me or one of the other organizers, and we will get you all set up. Tomorrow for the youth programming, we are really excited to have another youth keynote and a youth panel, and we are so happy to join the general track here for the first time that we're doing virtual. And with that, I would like to thank you again, Gumishish, and extend a thank you to the Alaska Native Heritage Center for setting us up and our entire little session that we have here for the live speakers. And I will turn it over to Randy.